before we blast off, say hi in the comments. It may seem small, but it helps the algorithm beam this out to more sci-fi fans. And I seriously love seeing who's part of the crew.
It was not, as humans might have expected, a particularly grand chamber. The Galactic Council had never seen the need for ostentation. The creatures that inhabited the cavernous room were themselves ostentatious enough by virtue of their diversity alone. When you gather representatives from 817 sentient species, the sheer biological variance provides all the spectacle one could want. Ambassador James Wilson, Earth's representative for the last 17 years, sat in his ergonomically adjusted seat. One of the few accommodations granted to oxygen-breathing bipeds in the council, and tried to maintain his composure. His palms were sweating, the air recyclers in his suit were working overtime. 17 years of representing a backwater planet had not prepared him for this moment. "The motion has been carried with a majority of 712 votes, announced the presiding entity, a massive gelatinous organism that communicated through shifting colors and patterns rippling across its translucent body. The translation came through Wilson's neural implant with a slight delay. "The Council will now deliberate on the selection of a new galactic capital, as the Centaurian crisis has rendered Nexus Station uninhabitable for the foreseeable future." The Centaurian crisis. Wilson winced at the phrase. A diplomatic euphemism for what had actually been the first interspecies war in over 3 millennia. The Centaurians, a hive-minded collective that had evolved from something like Earth's coral, had objected to new quantum transit protocols that would have disrupted their unique method of communication across vast distances. Negotiations had failed spectacularly, and Nexus Station, the administrative heart of galactic civilization for the past 800 years, had been consumed by a weaponized singularity. Wilson glanced around the emergency assembly hall on Procyon 4, where the council had convened following the disaster. The representatives were restless, their various appendages, tendrils, and sensory organs twitching with anxiety. The loss of Nexus Station had shaken the foundations of galactic stability. "History requires context," the presiding entity continued, its body flushing a deep indigo that Wilson's implant interpreted as solemnity. "Before we begin the selection process, the Council Archivist will present a brief overview of our governing structure for those representatives who may be newer to our assembly." The Archivist, a cybernetic entity that had once been organic but had opted for increasing mechanical augmentation over its 500-year service, projected a holographic timeline that hovered above the center of the chamber. The Galactic Council was formed 7,284 standard years ago. The Archivist's voice resonated with the artificial perfection of a being that had optimized its vocal apparatus for maximum clarity. Following the phosphorus conflicts that devastated the Orion Arm, the 17 original member species established the first concordat of mutual existence. Wilson had heard this history dozens of times during his tenure, but he listened attentively as the Archivist continued. "The Council's primary function has always been to maintain peace through regulated communication and trade. Unlike the political structures many species develop on their homeworlds, the Council does not impose laws upon its members, but rather establishes protocols that allow diverse civilizations to interact without mutual destruction." Several of the representatives from the more authoritarian species shifted uncomfortably at this reminder. The Draconian ambassador, with its glittering scales and ceremonial battle harness, made the clicking sound that Wilson recognized as disapproval. "The Council has expanded from 17 to 817 member species. It has weathered the quantum oscillation period, the Great Divergence, and the Mirror Civilization crisis. Each challenge has been met through adaptation and compromise." The hologram shifted to show Nexus Station in its prime, a sprawling construct of impossible geometries that had orbited a stable neutron star, drawing energy from its rotation. "For the past 802 years, Nexus Station has served as our administrative capital. Its destruction necessitates not merely a new location, but a reconceptualization of how our governance functions in this age of increasing complexity." Wilson felt a sudden wave of nausea that had nothing to do with the recycled air in his suit. Earth had been a member of the Council for barely a century, a diplomatic infant by galactic standards. Humanity had been discovered during a routine survey of what most spacefaring civilizations considered an unremarkable spiral arm, and had been granted observer status only after proving they could maintain a unified planetary government for 3 consecutive decades. Full membership had come just 38 years ago, and Earth still struggled to be taken seriously among species that measured their histories in millennia. The archivist's projection shifted again, displaying a complex 3-dimensional matrix of overlapping spheres and connecting lines. The selection of a new capital is not merely a matter of convenience or prestige. The capital serves as the nexus of quantum communication relays, diplomatic missions, and cultural exchange. It must meet 17 primary criteria and at least 80 of 143 secondary criteria. Wilson pulled up the criteria on his personal interface. Earth, of course, met perhaps 30 of the secondary criteria and only 10 of the primary ones. He was here merely as a formality, to observe a process that would undoubtedly result in the selection of a more established world, perhaps Deneb III, with its perfectly maintained ring habitats, or Ragel Prime, whose inhabitants had mastered dimensional engineering to expand their living space into adjacent probability fields. The primary criteria include stellar stability, defensive positioning, quantum communication bandwidth, spatial accessibility, gravitational comfort ranges, atmospheric variability accommodation, neutrality in historical conflicts, biodiversity support capacity, temporal consistency, psychiatric compatibility, dimensional integrity, cultural exchange infrastructure, emergency evacuation parameters, resource sustainability, adaptation potential, diplomatic impartiality, and evolutionary alignment. Wilson's implant struggled to translate some of the more esoteric concepts. Psychiatric compatibility was particularly troublesome, something about how well a location could support the divergent mental architectures of different species without inducing various forms of psychosis. Earth, with its relatively straightforward space-time geometry, was actually quite good on that front. Most planets were. It was the constructed habitats that tended to induce existential crises in certain species. The presiding entity's color shifted to something Wilson's implant rendered as procedural yellow as it announced, "We will now hear arguments from the 17 finalists selected by the preliminary committee." Wilson stifled a yawn. This would be the diplomatic equivalent of watching paint dry. 17 speeches from the most qualified candidates, each making their case with careful deference to council protocols. He began mentally composing his report back to Earth's unified administration. They would be disappointed but not surprised at being excluded from consideration. "Before we begin," interrupted a voice that Wilson's implant identified as belonging to the representative from Tau Ceti, a species of crystalline beings whose thought processes operated at speeds that made most organic life seem frozen by comparison. "I move to reconsider the finalist list based on the archivist's analysis of historical precedent." A murmur rippled through the chamber, a cacophony of clicks, whistles, electromagnetic bursts, and pheromone releases that the translation systems struggled to process simultaneously. "Clarify your motion," demanded the presiding entity, its color darkening with what might be annoyance. "The archivist's presentation makes clear that the Council has historically selected capitals at evolutionary inflection points. Nexus Station was chosen following the Great Divergence, when organic and synthetic life forms achieved equilibrium. The first capital on Arcturus Teherd was established when faster-than-light communication became possible. Each capital has marked a developmental threshold for our collective civilization." Wilson frowned, uncertain where this was leading. "I propose that we consider not just the practical criteria, but the symbolic significance of our choice. What evolutionary threshold are we now crossing? What new paradigm should our capital represent?" The chamber erupted in discussion. Wilson's translator implant gave up trying to process the overlapping conversations and simply displayed a warning about cognitive overflow risks. When order was restored, the presiding entity addressed the Tausiennial representative. "Your point is noted. Do you have a specific alternative to propose?" "I do," the crystalline being chimed, its facets refracting the chamber's light in complex patterns. "I nominate Earth." Wilson nearly fell out of his seat. A ripple of what his implant translated variously as surprise, amusement, outrage, and curiosity spread through the assembly. "Earth fails to meet 7 primary criteria," objected the draconian ambassador, its scales flaring with indignation. "Earth is technologically primitive by council standards," added the representative from Vega, the species of collective microbial colonies that had achieved sentience through distributed cognitive processes. And yet, countered the Tausetian, its voice rendered as melodic chimes in Wilson's implant, Earth represents the most rapid evolutionary and technological development any species has demonstrated since the Council's founding. From discovered to full membership in less than a century, from primitive combustion engines to quantum field manipulation in under 300 years. This isn't about technological achievement, rumbled the Draconian. It's about practicality. Is it? The Tausetian's crystalline structure vibrated in what Wilson's implant suggested might be their equivalent of a knowing smile. The Centaurian crisis was our first interspecies conflict in millennia. Perhaps our error was in becoming too homogeneous in our thinking despite our biological diversity. Perhaps what we need is not the most advanced civilization, but the most adaptable one. The most unpredictable one. Wilson felt every eye, visual sensor, electromagnetic receptor, and sensory apparatus in the room turned toward him. He swallowed hard. Humans, continued the Tausetian, have demonstrated remarkable adaptability. They have absorbed and integrated technologies from dozens of member species without losing their cultural identity. They have established diplomatic relations with species whose biology and psychology should have made communication kernelly impossible. Limitations. The presiding entity's colors shifted to a pattern Wilson had never seen before. Or evolutionary specializations? Your species' emotional variability gives you insights that more stable psychologies lack. Your adaptability, your drive to explore, these are not weaknesses in the current context. The debate raged for what seemed like hours. Wilson listened in growing astonishment as more and more representatives came to Earth's defense, citing examples of human creativity, resilience, and diplomatic innovation that he had never considered significant. Earth's literary traditions, its biological diversity, its peculiar ability to maintain cultural identity, despite rapid technological change. I remind the Council, said the archivist eventually, that when Nexus Station was selected, it met only 12 of the then 15 primary criteria. The Council voted to modify the criteria based on new evolutionary imperatives. Are you suggesting we do the same now? Asked the Draconian representative, its voice heavy with skepticism. I am suggesting that the criteria should serve our needs, not constrain them, replied the archivist. If the evolutionary imperative of this moment is adaptability in the face of unprecedented change, then perhaps some criteria should be weighted differently. Wilson watched in amazement as the matrix of selection criteria transformed before his eyes, with new weightings and relationships forming between the variables. Under this recalibration, the archivist announced, Earth meets 14 of the 17 primary criteria and 106 of the secondary criteria. The chamber fell silent. This is highly irregular, the Draconian ambassador finally said. So was the Centaurian crisis, replied the presiding entity, its colors now stabilizing into what Wilson's implant translated as decisive indigo. Perhaps irregular times call for irregular solutions. The vote, when it came, was not unanimous. Wilson counted 173 objections, mostly from the older members of the Council, but it was enough, more than enough. It is decided, the presiding entity announced, its body rippling with finality. Earth will become the galactic capital, effective upon the completion of necessary infrastructure. Ambassador Wilson, your government will be contacted with the specifications required. Wilson sat in stunned silence as the assembly disbanded around him. Earth, the galactic capital, humanity, thrust from galactic obscurity to the center of interstellar politics in a single session. He thought of the implications, the responsibilities, the transformations his world would undergo. The Tausetian representative approached, its crystalline structure glittering under the chamber lights. Ambassador Wilson, it chimed, I hope you understand what has happened here today. Wilson shook his head. I'm not sure I do. The galaxy is changing, the crystalline being explained. The old equilibrium is gone. We need a species that understands change, that embraces it, that has survived it repeatedly, a species that can help the rest of us remember how to adapt. But we're so young, Wilson protested. So inexperienced. Yes, agreed the Tausetian, and that is precisely why you were chosen. Youth sees possibilities that age has forgotten. The galaxy does not need a caretaker now, it needs a catalyst. As Wilson prepared to depart for Earth with the most momentous news in human history, he couldn't help but wonder if the Council had made a terrible mistake, or if they had seen something in humanity that humans themselves had not yet recognized. Marcus Delaney had never seen Washington, D.C. in such a state of controlled chaos. As chief advisor to the president on extraterrestrial affairs, he'd witnessed his share of diplomatic crises, but nothing compared to the frantic activity following Ambassador Wilson's transmission from Procyon. The news that Earth had been selected as the new galactic capital had turned the political establishment upside down. He stood now in the Oval Office, watching President Eleanor Howard pace between her desk and the floor-to-ceiling windows. Beyond the bulletproof glass, construction crews were already at work on the White House lawn, installing the first of many quantum communication relays that would link Earth to the farthest reaches of the galaxy. "They chose us because we're unpredictable," the president said, more to herself than to Delaney. "Not because we're advanced or powerful or wise, because we're chaotic." She stopped pacing and turned to face him. "Should I be insulted or flattered?" "Both, I think," Delaney replied, adjusting his glasses. At 53, he had spent over half his life studying alien civilizations, first as an academic, then as a government advisor. "The Tau Cetians don't think like we do. Their concept of chaos isn't negative, it's more like creativity. And they think we're creative enough to host 800 different species, most of whom have technologies we can barely comprehend." The president sighed. "The Chinese are furious that the council liaison chose to land in DC first. The Europeans are demanding equal representation on the Capital Implementation Committee, and half the world's religions are having existential crises over what this means for humanity's place in the cosmos." "People adapt," Delaney said. "We always have. That's what the council is counting on," she replied. "That's apparently why they chose us." The Galactic Council's assessment of Earth had been comprehensive, if peculiar by human standards. The initial report, translated into English by the Council's linguistic algorithms, read more like poetry than analysis. Earth, a water-rich anomaly with bipedal apex species demonstrating accelerated technological evolution despite biological stasis. Paradoxical combination of competitive and cooperative social structures, unique among council worlds for maintaining biodiversity despite industrial development, notable for sustaining multiple simultaneous economic paradigms and cultural frameworks within a single species, remarkable for achieving spaceflight while still debating fundamental philosophical questions. The report went on to detail Earth's unique position and resources, though not in terms humans would typically consider valuable. Earth's magnetosphere was apparently exceptional, providing natural protection against certain types of interstellar radiation that most civilizations had to construct artificial shields to repel. The planet's axial tilt and rotation created climate variations that could accommodate visitors from at least 300 different worlds without environmental modifications. Most surprising to the analysts at NASA was the Council's fixation on Earth's oceans. Nearly 70% of Council member species had evolved in aquatic environments, and Earth's vast, relatively unpolluted oceans represented the largest naturally occurring marine habitat in the galactic sector. The Vegan Collective had described Earth's oceans as the greatest untapped diplomatic resource in the spiral arm. But perhaps most valuable of all, from the Council's perspective, was Earth's location. Positioned on what humans had always considered the galactic periphery, Earth actually occupied a spatial juncture between several major trade routes. Routes humans hadn't even known existed until making first contact. With the proper quantum transportation infrastructure, Earth could become a nexus connecting regions of the galaxy that had previously required lengthy detours through unstable space. As Marcus Delaney explained to increasingly bewildered congressional committees, Earth had been hiding in plain sight. Think of it like discovering that your small rural town actually sits at the perfect junction point for several interstate highways if only someone would build the right on-ramps. The cultural and technological assessments from the Council had been more difficult for humans to process. Earth had been evaluated not just on its current achievements, but on its rate of adaptation and innovation. Where most Council species had taken thousands of years to progress from basic agriculture to spaceflight, humans had compressed this development into mere centuries. The Council found particular value in humanity's arts and philosophical traditions, The concept of fiction creating elaborate falsehoods for entertainment and enlightenment was apparently rare among sentient species. Most evolved with strict biological imperatives against misinformation. The few that did create fictional narratives typically limited them to religious contexts or practical simulations. Human music, too, was considered extraordinary. The Teositians, who communicated through complex harmonics, had described human musical tradition as primitive but brilliant in its constraints, particularly impressed by how humans created emotional responses through deliberately imperfect acoustic patterns. But the technological assessment had been humbling. On the Council's standardized scale of technological development, Earth registered at just 2.7 out of 10. Most Council members operated at levels between 6 and 8, with a few ancient civilizations approaching 9. The report noted that Earth's technological progress was admirably rapid but dangerously uneven, highlighting that humans had developed nuclear weapons before achieving unified planetary governance, a sequence that no other surviving Council species had followed. Despite this, or perhaps because of it, Earth had been deemed ideal for the new capital. The very planetary deficiencies that humans had assumed would disqualify Earth, its technological immaturity, its fractious politics, its environmental challenges, were viewed by the Council as opportunities. Earth represented a malleable foundation upon which a truly collaborative galactic hub could be constructed. As Ambassador Wilson relayed back to Earth, "They don't want to change us. They want to change with us." The impact of Earth's selection on humanity's place in the galactic community was immediate and profound. Once a footnote in the Council's vast archives, Earth suddenly became the focal point of galactic attention. Diplomatic missions from all 817 member species requested permission to establish permanent embassies. Trade representatives sought exclusive contracts with Earth's governments and corporations. Xenoanthropologists arrived in droves, eager to study humanity in its natural habitat before the inevitable transformations began. Marcus Delaney had spent weeks coordinating with the United Nations to establish the Global Capital Authority, a new international body tasked with managing the transition. The challenges were overwhelming, but the opportunities were equally staggering. "We're being offered technologies that would have taken us centuries to develop on our own," he explained to President Howard during one of their daily briefings. "Fusion power systems that could end our energy concerns, medical advances that could eliminate most disease, agricultural techniques that could triple food production while reducing environmental impact." "And in exchange?" the President asked, her expression guarded. "In exchange, we host the galaxy," Delaney replied simply. "We become the crossroads of a civilization spanning 100,000 light-years." The logistical challenges of transforming Earth into a galactic capital were unprecedented. The Council's requirements for basic infrastructure included systems that humanity had never imagined, let alone construct. The quantum communication network alone required the installation of 7,000 specialized relays around the planet, each calibrated to a different subset of the electromagnetic spectrum. The transportation hubs needed to accommodate beings ranging from microscopic collective intelligences to massive silicon-based lifeforms, 20 meters tall. Environmental protocols had to be established for 800 different biochemistries, many of which could be deadly to humans or to each other if improperly managed. Most daunting was the need for a centralized council facility, a physical location where representatives from across the galaxy could convene. After lengthy negotiations, an international agreement designated a 50,000-acre site in neutral Antarctica as the location for what humans were already calling Galactic Plaza. Council engineers arrived with technologies that transformed the frozen landscape, creating a self-contained ecosystem beneath a transparent dome that stretched 5 kilometers across. But for every challenge, there seemed to be 10 opportunities. The Council's presence sparked an explosion of collaborative ventures, alien technologies adapted for human use, human ideas reimagined through alien perspectives. The potential for increased trade and scientific advancement expanded exponentially with each passing day. Within 6 months, the first joint human-vegan medical research team announced a breakthrough in cellular regeneration. 3 weeks later, engineers from Earth and Tau Ceti unveiled a new energy storage system with 100 times the capacity of the best human batteries. Agricultural scientists from Iowa State University partnered from Deneb III to develop crops that could grow in previously non-arable regions without genetic modification. For ordinary citizens, These achievements were impressive, but abstract. What mattered more was how daily life changed as the first wave of galactic residents arrived on Earth. Thomas Wright had been driving cabs in Manhattan for 27 years. He'd seen it all, or so he thought, until the morning he picked up his first non-human fare, a Rigelian diplomat whose translucent gelatinous body required a specially designed containment suit to survive in Earth's atmosphere. "Chrysler Building, please," the diplomat had requested in perfect, if oddly accented English. Thomas had nodded, trying not to stare at the pulsating colors moving beneath the Rigelian's protective membrane. "First time in New York?" he'd asked, falling back on his usual pattern. "First time on Earth," the Rigelian had replied. "Though I've studied your architecture extensively. The Chrysler Building is a fascinating example of your Art Deco period, a style that emphasizes geometric precision while maintaining organic elements, very similar to early Rigelian construction principles." By the end of the 20-minute ride, Thomas had learned more about the history of New York's skyline than in his previous 6 decades of life. The next day, he enrolled in a crash course on interspecies etiquette and applied for certification as a xenotourist specialist, one of dozens of new professions emerging in the galactic era. Across the planet, similar scenes played out as humans and aliens navigated their new shared existence. In São Paulo, street vendors modified their food carts to offer dishes compatible with non-human digestive systems. In Nairobi, translation services became the fastest-growing sector of the economy. In Seoul, fashion designers collaborated with exobiologists to create clothing that could accommodate anatomies never before seen on Earth. New industries sprang up overnight: atmospheric conversion systems for alien residences, specialized legal services for interspecies contracts, entertainment adapted for sensory organs humans didn't possess. The global economy, which had initially reacted to the Council's announcement with panic, now expanded at unprecedented rates as human ingenuity found expression in the galactic marketplace. Cultural exchange flowed in both directions. Humans eagerly consumed alien art forms, music, and literature, or at least approximations translated into human-compatible media. Alien visitors just as eagerly absorbed human culture, often with unexpected interpretations. The draconian ambassador, after attending his first baseball game at Yankee Stadium, declared the sport a perfect metaphor for thermal dynamics in a closed system, and sponsored a team comprised entirely of draconian diplomatic staff. The Tausichians developed an inexplicable fascination with human stand-up comedy, despite their crystalline physiology making laughter physically impossible. Most profound was the impact on education. Children born into the galactic era grew up with a fundamentally different understanding of humanity's place in the cosmos. Elementary schools worldwide incorporated basic xenobiology into their science curricula. Universities established departments of interspecies communication and extraterrestrial ethics. Online translation apps included options for 17 non-human languages considered essential for basic galactic literacy. 1 year after Ambassador Wilson's historic transmission from Procyon 4th, Marcus Delaney stood on the observation deck of the newly completed Orbital Welcome Center, a massive station positioned at the Lagrange point between Earth and its moon. Below him, the blue marble of Earth was transformed by pinpricks of light marking alien settlements and diplomatic compounds. Above, a steady stream of ships arrived and departed, connecting humanity's homeworld to the vast civilization that had, until recently, existed beyond their awareness. Beside him stood Ambassador Wilson, recently promoted to Earth's chief liaison to the Galactic Council. "Did you ever imagine this?" Wilson asked, gesturing to the bustling activity around them. "Never," Delaney admitted. "In all my years studying theoretical xenosociology, I never imagined integration happening this quickly, or this smoothly." "Smoothly?" Wilson laughed. "There have been at least 50 diplomatic incidents requiring presidential intervention. The religious protests haven't stopped, and 3 different nations have threatened to withdraw from the global capital authority. And yet," Delaney said, "no one's launched a nuclear weapon. No pandemic of alien microbes has wiped out humanity, and Earth's economy has grown 30% in 12 months. He smiled. "By galactic standards, that's remarkably smooth." Wilson nodded, conceding the point. "The Council archivist told me yesterday that our transition is proceeding ahead of optimal projections. I think that's bureaucratic speak for better than we expected. The question is, what happens next?" Delaney said. Once the novelty wears off, once we integrated all this new technology, once being the galactic capital becomes normal. Ambassador Wilson turned away from the viewport to look Delaney in the eye. That's the beauty of choosing Earth, according to the Taotians. On most worlds, things eventually reach equilibrium. Systems stabilize, progress plateaus. He gestured again to the planet below. But humans never seem to settle. You achieve one impossible thing, then immediately start arguing about the next impossible thing. Is that a compliment or a criticism? Delaney asked. Both, Wilson replied with a smile. Definitely both. Below them, Earth continued its eternal rotation, now carrying with it the administrative heart of a civilization spanning 100,000 light years, a civilization that had chosen humanity not despite its chaotic, contradictory nature, but because of it, a civilization that had recognized in Earth's turbulent history and fragmented cultures not weakness, but a unique form of strength. As the next wave of galactic ships approached the orbital station, Delaney wondered what Earth would look like in another year, or 10, or 100. The possibilities were literally astronomical, and for the first time since the Council's announcement, he felt not just pride or anxiety about humanity's new role, but genuine curiosity. Earth had become the galactic capital. But, in the process, what would humanity become? Professor Daniel Hayes stood before his class at the newly established Institute for Galactic Studies in Geneva. 5 years had passed since Earth had become the galactic capital, and the classroom before him reflected the transformed planet. Among his 30 students, nearly half were non-human, representatives of 13 different species sent to learn from and about humanity. Today, he said, we're discussing long-term projection models for Earth's development as the galactic capital. He gestured to the holographic display that dominated the center of the circular lecture hall. These simulations were developed collaboratively by human futurists and the Council's Temporal Analysis Division. The display showed Earth as seen from orbit, then began to change as the simulation accelerated through time. New structures appeared on the planet's surface, massive arcologies housing millions, vast environmental domes protecting alien habitats, orbital rings connecting to space elevators that stretched beyond the atmosphere. This represents the projected physical development over the next century, Hayes explained. But the more profound changes won't be visible from orbit. He adjusted the simulation, zooming in to street level in what had once been downtown Singapore, but was now an intricate three-dimensional metropolis where humans and aliens moved through interconnected spaces designed to accommodate hundreds of different physiologies. The Council estimates that within 50 years, Earth will host permanent populations of at least 600 member species, Hayes continued. The long-term implications of this integration go far beyond architecture or infrastructure. A Rigilian student, a floating collection of translucent membranes contained within a hovering gravity sphere, pulsed with yellow light, indicating a question. Professor Hayes, does this not concern humans? To become a minority on your own world? It was a question Hayes had heard many times, from humans and non-humans alike. The answer had evolved as humanity itself had evolved over these first transformative years. A fair question, Delegate Lumina, he acknowledged, and one that caused significant anxiety in the early days. But most humans now recognize that we're not losing Earth. We're gaining the galaxy. He adjusted the simulation again, this time showing population projections. Current models suggest that the human population will stabilize at around 12 billion over the next century, while the non-human population on Earth will approach 8 billion. We will remain the numerical majority on our homeworld, even as we become fully integrated into galactic society. But numerical majority doesn't address cultural concerns, noted a human student from Nigeria. How do we ensure humanity's heritage isn't lost amid this transformation? Hayes nodded approvingly at the question. Preservation, through evolution, not stasis, he said. The Council's historical records show that species which attempt to isolate their cultures ultimately stagnate. Those that engage in cultural exchange flourish. He brought up a new projection, this one showing not physical structures but information networks, represented as flowing rivers of light connecting Earth to thousands of worlds across the galaxy. This may be the most significant long-term implication of our new role, Hayes said. Earth is becoming the primary nexus of galactic knowledge exchange. The Council's decision to relocate the Great Archive here last year was a watershed moment. The Great Archive, a collective repository of knowledge from all Council species, had previously been distributed across 17 specialized facilities throughout the galaxy. The decision to consolidate it on Earth had been controversial, particularly among the older Council members, but was ultimately approved as part of the capital transition. With the archive comes the potential for Earth to become the primary hub of galactic innovation, Hayes continued. The cross-pollination of ideas from hundreds of civilizations, each with unique evolutionary paths and technological approaches, creates possibilities that no single species could achieve alone. Already, the evidence of this transformation was visible throughout human society. Medical advances had extended human lifespans by decades. Educational methodologies adopted from the Tao-Te-Chings had revolutionized learning across all disciplines. Environmental technologies from Denebid III had begun to reverse centuries of ecological damage. But perhaps the most profound changes were philosophical. Humanity's understanding of its place in the cosmos had fundamentally shifted. The existential questions that had driven human philosophy for millennia, where did we come from, are we alone, what is our purpose, now had new contexts and new answers. The Council archivist estimates that 70% of all new patents filed with the Galactic Registry now originate on Earth, Hayes told his class. Not because humans are suddenly more intelligent or creative than other species, but because Earth has become the crucible where disparate knowledge systems and cognitive approaches combine. A student from Mars, human but born on the Red Planet, raised her hand. What about the isolation movement? Their protests are growing larger every year, Hayes sighed. The isolation movement had emerged in response to Earth's transformation, advocating for human withdrawal from the Council and the restoration of Earth for Earthlings. While still a minority, their rhetoric had grown increasingly strident as the pace of change accelerated. Change is never uniform or universally embraced, he acknowledged. Throughout human history, periods of rapid transformation have triggered reactionary movements. But the data suggests that each generation becomes more integrated than the last. Children born now take the galactic presence for granted in ways their parents never will. He switched the display to show education statistics. 93% of children born in the last 5 years are participating in multi-species educational programs. 78% are learning at least one non-human language before age 10. The future belongs to these children, not to those who fear change. Hayes paused, looking around the lecture hall at the diverse faces, human and non-human, all united in the pursuit of knowledge. This, he thought, was the true promise of Earth's new role, not just physical infrastructure or political influence, but the creation of understanding across boundaries that once seemed insurmountable. Let's talk about humanity's hopes and dreams in this new era, he suggested, shifting to the final section of his lecture. The Council's psychosocial assessment team has been tracking human aspirations through global surveys. The results are fascinating. The display changed again, showing a word cloud of human responses when asked about their hopes for Earth's future. The largest phrases, peaceful coexistence, knowledge, exploration, understanding, advancement, reflected an optimism that would have seemed naive just years earlier. Humans have always been dreamers, Hayes said. It's one of our defining characteristics according to the Council's xenoanthropologists. We imagine possibilities beyond our reach, then strive to attain them. Now, those dreams have expanded to encompass scales of time and space we could barely conceive of before. The most ambitious of these dreams was the Galactic Diaspora Initiative, a Council-sponsored program to establish human settlements on compatible worlds throughout the galaxy. Already, the first wave of human explorers had departed for 27 worlds identified as suitable for human habitation without extensive modification. Within 3 centuries, Hayes explained, the Council projects human presence on over 500 worlds, not as conquerors or colonizers in the old Earth sense, but as participants in a collaborative expansion guided by ethical principles established over millennia of interspecies relations. The Regalian student pulsed with a questioning blue light. Does this not contradict your earlier point about humans maintaining their presence on Earth, if so many depart? Not at all, Hayes replied. Human population growth will more than offset emigration for the foreseeable future. But more importantly, these settlements will remain connected to Earth culturally and politically. They represent an extension of humanity, not a replacement. He brought up the final simulation, a galaxy-wide view showing points of light representing council worlds, with lines of connection forming a vast network with Earth at its center. This is perhaps the most profound long-term implication of Earth's selection as the galactic capital, Hayes said. For the first time in our history, humanity has a clear path forward that doesn't end in extinction or isolation. We have become part of something larger than ourselves, while retaining what makes us uniquely human. The class fell silent, contemplating the visualization of humanity's potential future, connected to civilizations spanning thousands of light years, participating in a community of intelligence that had existed for millennia before humans first looked up at the stars. Your assignment, Hayes said finally, is to consider this question. What does humanity contribute to this galactic community that no other species can? What is our unique role in this vast civilization? As the students filed out, some walking, some floating, some shifting through phase states that human perception could barely register, Hayes remained at the podium, looking at the galactic visualization. 6 years ago, he had been a professor of international relations, focusing on humanity's fractious divisions and tenuous alliances. Now he taught species from across the cosmos about humanity's role in a civilization that spanned the stars. The change was so vast, so fundamental, that sometimes he still woke in the night, convinced it had all been a dream. But it wasn't a dream. It was history unfolding at a pace no one had anticipated. The rapid, chaotic, beautiful evolution of a species finding its place in the cosmos. Outside the Institute's windows, the sun was setting over Geneva, casting golden light across a skyline transformed by alien architecture. In orbit above, thousands of ships moved through carefully coordinated patterns, arriving and departing from the heart of galactic civilization. And in homes and schools and research centers across the planet, humans and aliens worked together, learning from each other, creating a future unlike anything either had imagined separately. Earth had become the galactic capital. And in doing so, it had finally grown into the promise humans had always sensed it held, not just a pale blue dot circling an unremarkable star, but the crossroads of possibilities spanning the cosmos.